All right, we have been in a series for the last couple of months called Love in Action. And although the graphics look a little different today, we're still in the same series, Love in Action, where we are looking at the love of Jesus through the Gospel of John, recognizing what love is according to Jesus and looking at his example, because we want to be people of love, as we have talked about. We want to express love. We want to represent the love of God. But sometimes we wonder, what does that look like? What does it feel like? What is love when it is lived out? And of course, the greatest example is Jesus, because God is love, and Jesus is God in the flesh. And so what does godly love look like when it's lived out in a human life? We look to Jesus, and we see that it is more than warm feelings. It is more than sentimentality. It is a choice. It is a choice to care for someone else, to actively seek their good, whatever that may be. And so we've been exploring Jesus and seeing what he does and seeing that it is a love that shows up. We see that in the incarnation itself, when we have our God show up in our mess, in our world, and he shows up and he is there with us. Love shows up. We see a love that pays the price, that is, it is sacrificial for the sake of someone else. It is willing to speak the truth, even when it is hard. We see a love that recognizes the barriers that come up between people and tears them down to bring people together. We see a love that provides for those who have need and cares for their needs. We see a love that stoops to serve, and Jesus washes the feet of his disciples, even the one who would betray him, even the one who would deny him. He stoops and he serves. We saw a love that abides. As Jesus teaches about abiding in him and abiding in his love, we recognize we only love like him as we are connected to him. And so we abide in him. And today, as it is Palm Sunday, the day that kind of commemorates Jesus' entry into Jerusalem on the week that would lead to his crucifixion and ultimately his resurrection a week later, we see a love that stares that most consequential week of human history square in the face. It is a week of both pain and triumph, a week of celebration and heartache. And in those tumultuous days that lay ahead of Jesus as he enters Jerusalem, we see a Jesus who, out of his love, chooses to be faithful to God's mission out of his love. And so we see a love that chooses faithfulness. On that day, on that Palm Sunday, as we call it, it commemorates, as I said, the day that Jesus approaches and comes into Jerusalem. I want to set the scene just a little bit. Because Jerusalem at this time is kind of a powder keg of expectations and tensions that's just waiting for somebody to strike a match. The city at this time it's Passover time, and so the city that is normally maybe around 50,000 people or so swells to somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 million people. It is bursting at the seams with people, and amidst all of those people, there is a tension in the air. Because Passover week celebrates, of course, the Exodus story, where God delivered his people from oppression under the thumb of another nation and brought them out to become his people and to live liberated, redeemed lives in his presence. And as the people were under the thumb of Rome, they longed for the day that was promised by the prophets that God would do it again. That God would liberate his people, that he would bring them to himself. And so Passover week was a time that was fresh on everybody's hearts and minds, and they longed for God to do something. They remembered the Egyptian army that chased after their ancestors being drowned in the Red Sea. And they wondered, when will it be Rome's turn to be drowned, so to speak, in their own version of the Red Sea? Now, Rome knew that this was on people's minds. And so Roman soldiers during this time patrolled the city streets, and they stood watch on top of the Antonia fortress overlooking the things that were going on in Jerusalem. And many of them surely had their hands on their swords, just waiting for the moment that a riot might break out so that they could be prepared to crush any uprising that came their way. And many in the crowds below were ready for that fight. Many of them longed for that fight to commence. Many of them had interpreted the scriptures to understand that the day was arriving, that it was near, that the Messiah would come, and surely he would bring revolution. And amidst all of that, stories had been spreading about a strange, unique rabbi from Galilee, of all places. And word had spread that, in fact, that rabbi, who some were saying might be the Messiah, that in fact he had done all sorts of signs, and in fact, just days ago, he raised somebody, they say, from the dead, a guy named Lazarus. And so they're wondering, is this the guy? Is it happening now? And many of them concluded that it was. And he was headed to Jerusalem. And so this is what happened as he made his way into this air of tension and excitement and hope and wonder. This is the scene. In John chapter 12, verse 12, the next day, the large crowd that had come to the feast, that is the Passover, heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took branches of palm trees and they went out to meet him, crying, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel." And Jesus found a young donkey and he sat on it, just as it is written, "Fear not, daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt." This is an exciting moment. Exciting moment. And what this crowd does and says in this moment says a lot about what their expectations actually were. As they picked up those palm branches, it wasn't just something convenient to wave around, that it wasn't just decoration either. It reminded them of some things. In particular, 170 years prior to this, there was a guy named Judas Maccabeus who had the nickname the Hammer. And so Judas the Hammer Maccabeus had led a bloody revolt against the Greeks. And he had fought his way into Jerusalem, and he came in and he overturned things, and he cleansed the temple of the things that were going on there that were wrong. He restored the national kind of independence for a time. And when Judas the Hammer Maccabeus entered the city of Jerusalem, guess what the people did? They waved palm branches. Because the palm branch was a national symbol. It's very much like we might have little American flags that we wave at a July 4th parade or something like that. It was something similar to that. It was a national symbol, but for them it was even more like waving a revolutionary flag in this moment. That's their expectation. But what we're going to see this morning is that Jesus' love is not going to be driven by expectations. He's not going to be motivated to just be a people pleaser, but he is prioritizing God's mission of redemption. The people have one thing in mind. Jesus knows something else and has something else in mind. And there's some overlap. They're saying some of the right things, but they're thinking the wrong things about those things that they're saying. If Jesus had wanted to meet their expectations, he might have approached the city a little differently. He might have, instead of a donkey, he may have come in on a large horse, a war horse. He may have marched himself right up to Pilate's palace. He may have started talking to some of the soldiers that are there and found out where there was some discontent with the way things were going, even among them, and see if he could sway some of them to his side. He would have raised up an army of people, and he would have gone out and he would have fought. Much like Judas the hammer, he would have had a bloody sword. And by the people's expectations, perhaps the Roman occupation would have been over by sunset. And he could have taken his place on a throne in the center of the city, and from that point on, they could experience maybe some lower taxes and restore their borders, and he would sit on his throne and rule over and put Rome and all the others into their place. But Jesus is not the hammer they might want. Instead, he rides in on a donkey, which has significant meaning according to the prophets, but the people don't recognize that in the moment. They will looking back. See, when a king rides on a horse, it's symbolic of bringing war. But when a king rides on a donkey, it is symbolic of bringing peace. And Jesus brings peace in a climate where many were wanting war. He's going to answer their pleas for salvation, which is what Hosanna means. It means save us. He's going to answer their pleas for salvation, just not in the way that they think. He's going to answer those pleas on a much larger scale, in a much deeper and more lasting way. But they won't be able to see that just yet. Paul was sometimes accused by his detractors of just saying things that people wanted to hear, to gather up people on his side. And he addresses that a little bit in Galatians 1. This is Paul. He says, am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Am I trying to please man? If I were trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. He's saying, look, I'm not just trying to give people what they want, because that's not the way of Jesus. It's not the way of Christ. Jesus, as he comes into the city, he's not looking to see if the faces of the crowd around him are happy with the way that he's going about things. He's looking to his Father. He's looking to the mission that lays in front of him, and he is going to be faithful no matter what anybody expects or thinks. He's going to be faithful to that mission. You know, God has never played by our rules. He has never bended to our expectations. He's never been hemmed in by what we think he ought to do. The prophet Isaiah says in Isaiah 55, this is God speaking through Isaiah. He says, my thoughts are not your thoughts. Neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than yours, and my thoughts than your thoughts. And we would do well to remember that. I mean, we can present our thoughts and our desires and what we think ought to happen. We can present that to God, but keep in mind that he sees more than you do. That shouldn't be a huge revelation, but sometimes we need to be reminded of that. He sees more than we do, and his ways are much higher than ours, and he will do it his way. And so he calls for us to trust him. You can imagine a pilot flying a plane through a treacherous storm. As the plane begins shaking and it's intending to come in for a landing, but the weather's just not right for it. The plane is shaking and lightning is flashing outside of the windows, and you can imagine the passengers becoming a little bit frightened. And perhaps saying, just land the plane already. Get us out of this storm. We need your help to get us home. But the pilot follows the flight plan. He knows that he needs to either stay in the air until it's safe to come down or perhaps divert to a different airport. And some of those people may be upset with that. They may be angry that they missed their connection, or they missed out on something. They had other plans that they wanted to do, and they may be upset. But the pilot knows better. The pilot has greater priorities, and he wants to keep people safe. Similarly, on a much bigger scale, of course, our God knows what we need. You see, the people at the time, they wanted the Messiah to come and save the Jews from the Romans. But God had other plans. He intends to save the Jews and the Romans and everyone else from the forces of evil. How often do we come to God with our hosannas, so to speak? We want him to fix whatever the problem is that is in front of us. Just save us, we pray, from this problem over here. Come and fix my problems. And Jesus cares about those things, those things that trouble us. He does care. And he asks us to cast our anxiety onto him because he does care. But his mission is one of redemption that transcends those problems. He works on a bigger scale, and sometimes he says no to our earthly expectations so that he can say yes to a much greater redemption. Our love for others, if we're looking at the love of Jesus and how it motivates him to act, remember, he's our example. And we want to keep these in mind as we seek to love others. Our love for others should keep that bigger picture in mind too. That our love isn't just about people pleasing and giving people what they want and affirming whatever they want us to affirm about them. It is about seeking what is truly good. It is bringing about redemption, God bringing about his redemption through his people as they send out his message of the gospel and the goodness and the transformation that comes by his grace. And so we are not driven by people's expectations or simply pleasing them. We want to see redemption in God's mission, which sometimes leads to misunderstanding. Sometimes leads to people thinking things about us that aren't true. As Jesus rode into the city and all these things were happening, it says his disciples did not understand these things at first. But when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written about him and had been done to him. And so as he's riding in and people are shouting Hosanna, they're quoting from Psalm 118. They're shaking the palm branches and remembering Judas Maccabeus and the revolt that he led. And they're hopeful that this is the Messiah and he's going to change everything and bring about liberation. They didn't understand what was going on. And the text says even his disciples that were with him didn't understand what was going on. That eventually they would look back in hindsight and recognize. It's one thing to be misunderstood by a crowd of strangers. It's a whole other thing when the ones who have spent the last 3 years with you basically every day, and you've told them plainly on multiple occasions what is going to happen, and they still don't get it. You can imagine how you would feel. Jesus knew they didn't get it. He had encountered that time and time again. I think he could see the look on their face. They didn't understand. And he knew that would lead them in just a few days to abandon him. He knew that was coming. And he knew that he would face the cross by the end of the week. He would face the cross and everyone would believe that he had failed. He knew that nobody understood, and yet he carried on. And so we see that his love drives him to transcend expectations, to stay on mission, and we see that love motivates us to seek the good of others, even when they cannot understand what we're doing. Do good for others, even if they don't recognize that that is what you're doing. Jesus knows what it is to be misunderstood. Jesus' disciples were regularly confused in the Gospels. I see it over and over again. But Jesus is in this moment, we don't see him lashing out at them. We don't see him angry with them for not understanding. He knows that they just can't see it yet. It's only going to make sense in hindsight. And the text said that when he was glorified, then they remembered. What does he mean by glorified? It's in John's gospel, it occurs a few times that glorified becomes a way of talking about the cross. When Jesus goes to the cross is the moment in John's gospel that he was glorified. And so Jesus is going to have to go to the cross, and it's going to take beyond the cross before they will understand what is happening. Jesus alone, he's the only one there that knows the cost of his mission. Everyone else has no idea. And so he is willing, out of his love, he is willing to appear like he has failed. He is willing to appear like he is wrong in many people's eyes for a few days so that they could be right for eternity. That is love. He sought after their good at great personal cost. Later this year, I'm planning to do a whole series over love's description in 1 Corinthians 13. So we'll unpack that more fully when we get to it then. But I don't want to read this description to you now. Paul describes what love is in 1 Corinthians 13, and he says, love is patient and kind. Love doesn't envy or boast. It's not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things and believes all things and hopes all things and endures all things. Do you see this in Jesus as he approaches Jerusalem in this scene? Maybe we could kind of pick it apart and find every representation of each one of these words. We won't do it that deeply this morning, but we do see, I think, a Jesus that is patient with those around him. Even as they are ignorant and proclaiming the wrong things, and I don't mean that as an insult, they just don't understand. He's patient with them as they miss the point. He is on mission. There is no insistence from the flesh there's no insistence on the human way of revolution and seizing power. We see no hint of irritation, no hint of being put off by their ignorance. He carries on faithfully for their sake. Have you ever had to do the right thing even when it made you look bad? Even if it made people think that you were the bad guy in the situation? Parents have to deal with that a lot, I think. Setting a boundary that their kids think is unfair. That they're just being mean. Or maybe it's in other situations where you see a friend that's headed down the wrong path. They're involved with some wrong things, and you want to intervene and help them to find the right path, and they respond to you with anger, and they feel like you've betrayed them by pointing out the wrong path they're on. Or maybe in your workplace, you've been the employee that had to walk with integrity, even though everybody else thought that they should take this shortcut or do it a different way. And you looked like you just couldn't be a team player. Have you ever had to do the right thing when it made you look bad? Do we have enough of Jesus' love driving us to do the right thing anyways? to see that there is a bigger story that is at play? Can we endure being misjudged in order to be faithful? As Jesus enters into Jerusalem, he then begins to teach. And he further indicates what he knows lies ahead for him that week. And he says here in verse 23, Jesus answers them, he says, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." And so he takes our minds from the bustling city streets to the quiet miracle that happens out in the fields. And in this it's kind of like a mini parable. It's surely another one of those sayings that people aren't going to understand what he's saying until they look back in hindsight and recognize what is happening. He points them to the coming reality of the cross so that when they look back, they'll see that this was how it was supposed to happen, that this is what needed to happen. And so we see here the way that love drives us and it motivates us to seek the good, even when we are not understood. When we have that kind of self-giving love, it can bring about an abundant harvest of goodness. Remember this. Self-giving love brings an abundant harvest of goodness. Jesus appeals to the image of seeds, something that I think can be easily overlooked. I mean, seeds, if you really think about it, are amazing. They're astounding what happens from those little seeds. They can sit in some sort of container for a very long time and just sit there, nothing happening. And yet there's all this potential for life that is contained in that little shell. Do you know, when they did some excavations over in Israel at Masada, they found a container that had date seeds in it that were 2,000 years old, from a species of date palm that was extinct. They planted those seeds and it grew. And we brought back this palm tree from the time of Herod. It's incredible the amount of life potential that is in these little seeds. And all they need to do is to be planted in the ground, buried and covered up. The image of death. And out of that image of death comes life. Life is released from them as they are buried. It's a beautiful picture. Are you familiar with the giant sequoia trees? These are amazing trees. Massive. Some they can be 300 feet tall and thousands of years old. They're amazing plants. But they are, for decades, people wondered why new sequoias weren't growing underneath them. And they discovered that the sequoia, kind of the cone that is on them, is a unique thing. It can stay on the tree for 20 years without ever opening. And it stays up there, the seeds are locked inside, they can't come out. The only thing that opens the cones, get this, is a forest fire. As the ground catches on fire, the heat dries out the cones and they're able to open up and the seeds fall out into the ash that is left behind below. And then that becomes the fertile soil where they are able to germinate and begin to grow a new tree. It's amazing to me that fire, the death of that fire brings, causes new life to come out of those cones. Jesus' love can be kind of like that fire in a way. The cross looked like a forest fire that was consuming the hope of Israel, but in reality, the heat of the cross was cracking open the seed of his life so that a harvest of millions of souls, including you and me, could be born. Jesus becomes that self-giving seed that yields new life. Self-giving love brings an abundant harvest of goodness. Philippians 2, verse 7, Paul says that Jesus emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. We've read this a couple of times already in this series, but this is Jesus' self-giving love. And if we are to live a life of love that reflects his nature, we are called to give ourselves too, expecting that God's power will be at work in that self-giving to bring about a great harvest. And so Paul says to the Galatians in chapter 6, verse 9, he says, "Let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap, if we don't give up. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith." And I realize that the word love is not there in that passage, and the words self-giving are not there, but I think we see it represented in what he's describing there, this self-giving love that gives of itself to do good works for other people. Don't give up, because God will bring about fruit from that. We can spend our lives in self-preservation mode. We can be like those cones on the tree that just won't open up, just holding on. We can live in self-preservation mode, staying intact, staying safe away from the harm. We can remain guarded. We can hold ourselves back. We can hold back our hearts. We can hold back our time. We can hold back our resources. Or we can learn to be people of love whose hearts can crack open, who can give of ourselves for the sake of others, who can let go of our need to be in control of things, who can let go of our need to be comfortable. And I think that if we will be self-giving in these ways, I think that we will be amazed at the harvest of fruit that God will grow through that. Jesus goes on. In this same little parable, he concludes it by saying, "Whoever loves his life loses it. And whoever hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. For if anyone serves me, he must follow me, and where I am, there will my servant be also. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him." When he describes loving your life, he's describing the idea of holding on, as we describe, being closed off and holding on with white knuckles to the way that you think things ought to be, to your comfort and your being that hard shell staying inside the seed. And when he says hate your life, this is not like putting yourself down kind of thing. It's a kind of an expression to say that you love serving, you love Jesus so much. It's like you hate your own life by comparison. It's not that you actually hate yourself. It's not that kind of thing. But he's describing this self-giving seed that invites us. He's the self-giving seed that invites us to be that kind of seed too. And presenting this paradox, you've got to die to live. The two words that he uses here, there's two words that he uses for life. When he says whoever loves his life, it's the word suke. And then when he describes if you let go of it, if you hate your life, let go of that, then you have eternal life. It's the word zoe. And there's these two ideas of life. The suke is the earthly the earthly existence of our lives, where the zoe is this eternal life with our God. And which one do you want to hold on to? Which one do you value more? And he says, if you're going to be my servant, then you've got to go where I go. You got to do what I do. You've got to follow me. And so we want to follow in his footsteps, because ultimately that's what it means to be a disciple. is to follow in his footsteps. And we join Jesus in the victory of his love as we surrender everything in pursuit of him. Again, following him is what it means to be a disciple, going where he goes, doing what he does. There is an old Jewish expression you may have heard before about disciples and saying, "May you be covered in the dust of your rabbi." It's an old Jewish expression, which is to say, may you follow your teacher so closely that as he walks down the road, the dust that he kicks up gets all over you, that you are that close. And so may that be true of us. May we follow Jesus so closely, may the dust of our rabbi be covering us. May we be people who aren't just cheering for Jesus from the side of the road, waving our palm branch. May we then go from there and join him and follow him down the road, giving up whatever else we have to do so. Paul says in Galatians 2:20, "I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me." I think that Paul says, look, the life I'm living, it's not even my life anymore. That person is gone. He was nailed to the cross with Jesus, and I live a life now that is powered by him. When you see me walking around, when you see me doing things, it's not me, it is Jesus at work within me. That's what Paul is saying. Which is what Jesus called his followers to. In Luke 9:23, he says, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it." Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? This is the surrender that we're called to. It's a surrender that is a daily choice. It's a daily pursuit. It is a faithful decision each morning to say, "Not my will, but yours be done." There's a story about a professional trapeze artist who was asked about the most terrifying part of the performance. You can probably imagine what it is. He didn't say it was the somersaults or the 100-foot drop. He said the hardest part was the release, letting go. To catch the next bar or to reach out for the other performer to be caught by them, to move forward to the next level of the performance, they have to let go of the bar that they're currently holding on to. And for a split second, they're in the middle of the air, completely vulnerable, no control, and literally for a moment falling. But he knows that if he doesn't let go of the first bar, he will eventually lose momentum and just dangle there until he falls anyway. And so he'll be safe, but he'll be stuck. To fly, he must surrender. And he has to trust that the catcher is there, swinging toward him at the exact right moment. And in our lives, we can think of holding on to our life as gripping that bar, and Jesus calls us to let go. Not to just hold on and shout our hosannas from our side, but to surrender, to let go and reach out for him. Faithfulness is that mid-air moment where we trust that the victory is found in the catch, not in our clinging. Surrender in our culture, when we talk about that word, it sounds a lot like losing. You surrendered. You lost. That's the worldly perspective. But in God's kingdom, the path to victory is through surrender. It's kind of one of those paradoxes, those upside down ways of God's kingdom, the ways that it subverts this world and the nasty habits that this world teaches us. The path to victory is through surrender. So I'd ask you to just consider as we begin to wrap up this morning. What are you holding on to? What are you holding on to? Are there grudges that you cling to in your heart because for you they're the only sense of justice that you have in the situation? What are you holding on to? Is there some career goal that maybe has become an idol that you strive for, that you sacrifice for, that maybe it's time to let go of? What do you hold on to? Is there a fear that you have of what other people are going to think if you do this or that? Does their expectation, is it pleasing them what drives you? What do you hold on to? Is it comfort? Is it some status that you have? What are you clinging to? Our path of letting go, really, if our ultimate letting go begins as we choose Jesus in the waters of baptism. Because that's the moment where we say, I am dying to myself. And we bury that person in that, as they say, watery grave. We are lifted up to new life as those who are carried by His life to represent Him in that newness of life. If you've never been baptized, then we have water ready for you. We'd love to baptize you this morning. In just a moment, we're going to sing an invitation song, and I'll be at the back of the room with the elders, and that's a time where if you want to be baptized today, please reach out. Let's get that done. Or if you just want to talk about something or pray with somebody or you need anything at all, we'll be there for you during that time as well. But may we welcome our King with shouts of Hosanna. Save us, we pray, but then may we join Him on the road, covered in His dust. May we seek the good of others just as He would, even when it is costly, even when it is underappreciated, and may we trust that through that He will bring an astounding harvest. Again, in the next song, if you need anything at all, we'll be in the back of the room for you, but let's conclude with these final verses from 2 Corinthians 5:14. For the love of Christ controls us, because we have concluded this, that one has died for all, therefore all have died. And He died for all, that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for Him who for their sake died and was raised. If we can be there for you this morning, would you please reach out as we stand and sing?